on 89.1 locally, serving the 5-county area. Our extraordinary person of interest today is Allan Schear, Schear. I have been misspelling it. They're laughing.
In case the
Al-
FBI is listening.
No, it's Schear, right? Okay. And Allan is an Emmy-winning broadcast journalist. He is a photojournalist, actually. Allan is a teacher, an adjunct professor, collector of watches, cameras, a documentarian, a Renaissance man. But more about Allan's contribution to enthusiasts of the film art, we'll let him tell us. Good morning, Allan.
Good morning.
And good morning, Jill.
Good morning, John.
Jill is our weekly co-host and producer. We are also streaming live on YouTube. So we'll start. We're going to be on for an hour today from 10 to 11 because Allan has other commitments. He finds other things not necessarily as important as Jill and myself.
Love you just the same.
Thank you. Did you start out wanting to be a photojournalist?
No,
How did that happen?
by accident, like all good things. I actually started out wanting to be an engineer, electrical engineer.
You wanted to be that?
I grew up I'm fond of saying I was born and lowered in New York City. Not born,
Born in New York City?
Born and lowered in New York
Lower.
City.
Okay.
And I wanted, in the worst way, to be an electrical engineer. My cousin was one. I thought it was fascinating. Taught me all about ham radio. And I went to a specialized high school in New York City for math and science students. And from there, I went to a pretty well-known engineering school in New York City. And after about 2 years of wine, women, and song, so to speak, the dean called me into his office and said, "Mr. Schear, I'm looking at your grades. I hate to tell you this, but you have no business being in the engineering business. I suggest you transfer to the humanities," which is what I did. It was the best advice I ever got. And I transferred to a school, SUNY Buffalo, and started working at the school newspaper. And from there, my interest in photojournalism took off.
So you transferred to a school in Buffalo, New York?
Yep.
What was the name of it? What was that?
SUNY Buffalo. It's now called
SUNY.
Right.
Yeah.
It's now called the University of Buffalo.
Okay.
It still is, in my mind, the flagship campus of the State University of New York. They have a med school, dental school, law school, social work, education. It's 30,000 students.
30,000.
Yep.
We actually have a listener, Clyde Lido, who lives in Buffalo, and
Hi, Clyde.
Say hello to Clyde. Yes, that Buffalo, was that once like a storage place for like mob figures? Like
I think you're talking about Lewiston, New York, which is kind of a little north of Buffalo, which was and is rumored to be a very big mob hideout.
But you knew about that.
I knew tangentially about it when I was working in Buffalo, but never had the occasion to, as far as I know, interact with any of them.
I generally ask this question just kind of like it helps to warm up. You're kind of like a pro's pro. So this is a real challenge for me as an interviewing you because
I'm grading you.
Oh, I know that.
I'm not on a curve.
No, I know. I'm well aware that you are grading me, and it's really for me personally an honor to interview you because you have a reputation. You've traveled throughout the world as a photojournalist, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to be very careful not to drop any ings, and
Me too.
I will use words that I ordinarily don't use.
Best behavior.
Is it the best behavior?
John was in one of my classes when I taught at Montgomery County Community College, and in my classes I did occasionally curse. So now I have promised to be on my best behavior and
speaking of that, I have a cousin. I went to visit him the last couple of days, and he was a professor at Penn State. And on one occasion, he dropped a bomb, and he was reported. And he had been a professor for a long time, and he was reported and admonished for it. for you dropping a bomb.
Yeah.
I know you dropped them regularly.
Yes,
Well,
I was
you
very fortunate. Nobody ratted me out.
So actually, Allan's not only a photojournalist; he's actually a videographer. So that's really where his.
I like to call it a
background-
documentary filmmaker.
Mhm.
But yes,
And
I
he's-
started out in still photography and migrated to writing and photography, and then migrated to news film or news camera work.
What's through Jill?
So
Jill
look-
was your best student, wasn't she?
Well,
I
looking
don't know
back,
about best. She was one of them.
looking back at your history, what would you say was the most pivotal or uh, lasting memory of that experience?
As a photojournalist,
Videographer,
I was
documentarian.
I was a documentary storyteller for about 30 years. I will tell you one of the stories that still sticks with me to this day is a janitor at Penn who took one class per year for about 20 years to get his degree. This is, I think Penn has a School of General Studies. It's known as their night school. And as a janitor, you were allowed to tuition-free courses. And he was graduating, and yet, the school didn't put out any PR. They had Jodie Foster as their speaker, and that was where all the PR attention went. But I knew somebody in the office, and the secretary managed to tell me, see that man over in the corner cleaning the desks? He's going to be graduating after 20, 30, 25 years, I believe. So I just started to talk to him. This fascinating guy. He was from North Philadelphia. Pretty much didn't have much money, but he prided himself on being an educated man. And I was able to convince him to let me come to his house to shoot him, basically writing his last, paper for. And I also was able to follow him when he came to graduation. And it was all what we call a natural sound story. There was no narration. It was just an interview with him underlying the video. And the last shot to this day I saw is him getting on a city bus in his academic robes heading toward graduation. That's how I ended it. I didn't want it, ended. And eventually we added an addendum. He had been saving a space on his wall for the diploma. And the last shot was him hanging the diploma basically in that space.
Wow.
I wanted to ask you, how did your parents feel when were your parents, was your father an engineer?
No, my father owned a chain of auto parts stores in New York City along with his brothers. So he did later in life offer me and my sister an opportunity to open up a tool store. He was way ahead of his time.
A tool store?
Yeah. Do you remember Brookstone?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, that's sort of along those lines. So he offered us, to give us seed money, and he had contacts. And my sister and I said, no, we had other plans. So, no, he actually had no idea I was interested. He helped. That's not true. He knew that I had bought a camera with money I earned during a summer job. And when my father and mother won a trip to Ireland or something, they picked up a lens for my camera at Shannon Free Airport. I remember this because they came back and gave my sister a sweater, and they gave me a little box, and I opened it up. And while I could afford the camera body, I couldn't afford the lens. So this lens was a great gift that completed the package. And so I think from there, he kind of knew that's where I was maybe headed. If engineering didn't work out, I could become who knows what, some sort of photographer.
Well, a lot of people don't realize how technical and engineering like video and photography is. And we look at it and we see a photo and we don't always appreciate perhaps what went into it. as
Well,
far as settings and
Light,
manipulation.
I like to
light.
say light is a science. Basically
Light.
judging light, where it's coming from, the angle, the
Audio
color
is
temperature.
extremely important in,
Yep, and video. I mean,
video.
some of the people I worked with, I would consider geniuses. The way they could mold light and bend it and, change a mood or a scene. And same with, audio engineers, and same with videographers. So, yeah, to a certain extent, they are engineers, just not in the traditional sense.
I remember the first class I took with you.
She hated me.
I didn't like you because you told me to stop doing Animotos, which I enjoyed, which are automated, manipulated, computer generated little ditties, I call them, with photos. And you just basically pick something, and they do it automatically now with iPhones. But you sent me out with a group of students, and he said, okay, Jill, you're in charge of audio. Whatever his name was, John, you're in charge of video. This one was in charge of light, and this. And I thought to myself, oh, he hates me. He put me in charge of audio. That's just the worst job. And to this day, I'm eating those words because it's so important.
Yeah. I used to have
so
an
important.
argument with, there was another professor at Montco, Morgan Betts, and we used to have an ongoing argument, which was more important, audio or video. And I said, without video, you're just radio. That was my argument. But I eventually started teaching that audio is just as important as video. And so if you're a student in class now, pay attention to your audio.
Well, you can change video, but if you miss the audio, I heard a story about an interviewer, and they were so embarrassed that they wouldn't return to get the interview, but the camera was silent. They didn't have, they got nothing. So if you come away with nothing.
Me, I've done it.
Oh, I think.
Are you talking about me?
No.
Because I
think everybody worth their salt
has
watched, either the audio or the video once, twice,
a
dozen times.
If you plug in to the wall your camera, there's a good chance you're not going to get good audio. People don't realize that.
If you don't monitor the audio, there's a good chance you may get a buzz or interference or a radio station. So I always drilled into my students, it's not enough to listen to that little speaker built into the camera. Put on headphones, monitor the audio while you're shooting.
There's another lesson that you taught me.
Wow, I actually, look at that. I'm so happy.
A lot's coming out now.
Really irks
Welcome to True Confessions.
So Allan would always tell us, clean the lens. And he would carry around a little, probably has one now. And I was thinking that we should create one. Okay. So he carries around this little, this one says Ray-Ban. And what is this made of? Microfiber felt. He's got a few of them in his pocket, and John and I now carry them around.
Yes, I do. I have in right here.
So anyway, I'll be watching on national television a show where there's the camera is obviously dirty, or it's got raindrop or something, and I'm thinking to myself, when are they going to notice? So that's very important to clean your lens.
I worked for NBC Sports, and of course we covered sports in all sorts of weather. And one of the biggest bugaboos was when it was a rainy or a snowy day. I was of the mind that the snowflakes and the raindrops are distracting. But a director, famous director, whose name I won't mention, was of the mind that no, let it be. You want to give the audience at home the thrill of being at the game and show them that this is a messy game, that it's cold, the wind is blowing. So I always kind of give it a second thought when there's water on my lens or snow, falling.
Because you might want to leave it on there.
Yeah.
To be an engineer is an exact science. There's an exactitude to it. So that really did carry over for you as far as being a photo documentarian. So, did you also do interviews?
Yes. I
How did you develop your interviewing skills?
one of my first jobs out of college was actually as a um, bureau reporter for United Press International. It's long gone, but UPI was the main competition to the AP, Associated Press, a wire service. Basically, they picked up local stories, covered local events, put them on a wire for newspapers, radio stations around the county, state, country, world, as a matter of fact. So I actually had to take a vocabulary test, an IQ test, and a spelling test. Had to be interviewed in New York City, and lo and behold, I was selected. And my first job out of college was as bureau reporter at the UPI in Buffalo, New York. And I was there in 1977 when the blizzard of 77 hit. The city was inundated with several feet of snow. The economy came to a standstill. The governor at the time called in the National Guard. Several people had died out on the street. They were actually picked up by snowplows unbeknownst to the driver. Several died in their cars on the New York State Thruway. Anyway, that was a pretty big story, and that was one of my first national stories. If you go to my LinkedIn page, I think it's on my LinkedIn, maybe not. It's on there somewhere. It's called Buffalo Blizzard, and the whole story is there. And the kicker is that the weatherman in Buffalo had enough snow, and he decided to retire rather, after that storm.
Wow.
Were you there when O.J. Simpson was there?
Yes, I was. Matter of fact, there's another story. And
Did you interview him?
Sure, all the time. This was back before OJ had his troubles.
Well, he always had troubles, but this is before he had real big trouble.
Big troubles, yes. Yeah. And a matter of fact, I went to his house in Amherst, and
this is when he was married the first time.
Right. And this is after one of his children, I believe, died in a swimming pool accident. And the assignment was, what's OJ like at home? And that was it. It was a very pleasant, encounter. Fellow is well spoken. So, and then when I worked at NBC Sports, OJ was actually a sideline reporter for a few games.
Did he remember you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He remembered my face, didn't remember my name.
Were you surprised to hear they committed or was accused of committing?
You're in the business long enough, you're never surprised by anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I could be sitting next to Jill, could be a mass murderer for all I know.
Or be a murder-suicide. A murder-suicide in her house. Listen, before we get admonished, Jill, we are interviewing Allan Schear today on WXVU.org, streaming worldwide and on YouTube and local.
And the reason why John is saying this is because I reminded him that with station ID, you should recap who you're interviewing and what they're all about.
Well, if you would have allowed me to finish the sentence, I would have.
Shut up now.
I was going to give you credit for pointing that out to me in a text message. So yes, we are at WXVU.org, 89.1, The Roar, broadcasting, streaming worldwide, live from Villanova University. All right, now back to this. So,
who's the most interesting person that you've interviewed over your career?
They come and go. It's so hard to.
Well, maybe Jill. You might have been his most interesting person.
He didn't interview.
I don't want to, get into the political world because.
Well, you interviewed Fidel Castro.
Yeah, Fidel Castro. But Fidel Castro wasn't that interesting. He just droned on for, I believe it was 5 hours. We came to interview Fidel. We traveled with the.
What did you have to get?
We had to get
clearance?
Special permission. Yes, this was back in.
So you're not an operative there or anything, are you? You're not a CIA operative. No, you're
look at how I'm dressed. I mean,
there's nothing. Yeah.
And so he droned on so long that.
Did he speak Spanish or English?
English. And some Spanish.
Did he flip-flop back and forth?
And he went for so long. We didn't have enough battery power or tapes. So I had to send a runner back to our hotel room twice to pick up extra batteries and extra tapes. And this was we were invited down there because Cardinal Hayes, I believe it was Cardinal Hayes of New York City, was also invited, and that was the story basically.
What did you learn anything from him? Oh, well, you learned something from everyone. So I'm sorry I said that. From everybody you interview, you learned something from him.
He was charismatic, I will say that.
He was charismatic.
Yeah, I could see why a country would follow him.
I'm not familiar at all with the interview, so I'm just going to roll stuff off my head. Was like any reference to the Bay of Pigs?
No.
Any reference to the Kennedy assassination?
Nope.
Yeah. Well, so he knew what you were going to ask him in advance?
No, we never, as far as I know, with NBC, we never ever give an interview or an interviewee the questions in advance.
Well, but some people request that, don't they?
And then we politely deny it and say, would you like to continue with the interview, or we'll be on our merry way?
Yeah.
It's almost tantamount to paying somebody for an interview. A legitimate news operation does not pay for interviews. Right. TMZ, on the other hand, is an entertainment entity, and they are known for paying for celebrity interviews.
Do you think that? No, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. There's a level of morality and ethics that you think is over the line now with the press. Do you think the press is damaging? Do you think that documentarians?
I think the press, the mainstream press, is in real trouble. There's a Dylan song. I just saw a Complete Unknown, so I'll quote Dylan.
It's a good movie.
Yes, very good movie. The times they are changing, and most of our audience is now under 35. They don't watch the evening news. They don't pick up a newspaper. They don't buy a magazine. They basically get their news from Facebook or social media,
which is dangerous.
It's very dangerous. So
TikTok.
So what's your opinion? We're very interested on TikTok. How do you think the Supreme Court is going to rule on that?
I never tried to second guess the Supreme Court yet. I mean, as we're speaking, I have to double check this, but Trump is supposed to be sentenced in New York, and it's because the Supreme Court denied his bid to delay his sentencing. So with TikTok, I can't even begin to imagine how they'll rule. I do see the validity in why would we want to turn over all this information to a supposed enemy. But then Jill and I were discussing this earlier, and I said, look, there's a channel called RT, Russia Today, which is on hundreds of cable stations around this country. And basically, it's a channel controlled by the Russian government. And people listen to it and believe the falsehoods and misinformation and disinformation they spew all the time. I used to teach in my Com 101 class, Intro to Mass Media and Society. There was a philosopher, John Stuart Mills, who said, the marketplace of ideas will always reign. And that is, we will listen to any idea, and the brightest ones will survive. I'm not so sure that's taking hold these days.
No, I don't think so.
You mentioned, you said you didn't want to, prior to me asking you about Fidel Castro, you said you didn't want to be political. Was that it?
Yeah, I just,
with regards to what?
Politics to me is an ever-changing story these days. Somebody will say, most definitely we're going to do it this way, and then they'll reverse course, pivot. So you can never hold a politician is like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall, in my opinion.
Yeah, or squeeze it or run through your fingers. Yeah.
While politics was a big part of covering the news, I was not, when it came to stories, a big fan of political coverage.
You didn't.
No, I like basically breaking news.
Did you interviewed a famous mob guy?
I interviewed John Gotti. I interviewed
I'll bet he was real charismatic.
Joey Merlino in Philadelphia. John Gotti was very charismatic.
Joey Merlino's offered to come on the show. The problem is we can't control the F bombs.
Well, you should have what's known as a 7-second delay. I don't see it.
I'll speak about
I
that.
see a board over there, but I don't see a flashing red light, which is usually a 7-second delay. When I worked in the studio,
Yeah, but then the thing would just continually be running for 7 seconds.
you always had one of the entry-level jobs was for an intern to have their finger on the button, and if somebody cursed on air, the director would quickly turn around, point to the intern, or yell "now," and they would hit the button, and the audio would go blank for 7 seconds. So that's how you could get around it.
Yeah.
But like you said, you may have dead air for
How did
a
Stern
good hour.
get around it?
How did
How did Howard Stern get around it?
he was on satellite, and the FCC does not control satellite
The
communications.
FCC controls this, what we're doing.
Well, this is also, if I remember correctly, a college radio station that's over the air, right? This is on FM. So yes, the FCC controls the airwaves on AM and FM. It doesn't control the internet. So yeah, you would still be, you would still have to adhere to the FCC rules and regulations.
What was your interview like with John Gotti? And why were you
It
interviewing
was
him?
on the run with the reporter at the time at NBC in New York was John Miller. And to tell you the truth, I can't remember if it was related to a hit or a body found or what have you. I just remember that John Miller's father was a policeman in New York.
John Gotti's father.
No, John Miller, who's the
John
reporter.
Miller. Oh.
And somehow he had befriended John Gotti, and they were good friends. And that was the inn with John Miller. And John knew where he was going to be, at what restaurant, and he was going to come out. And he approached him on the sidewalk as he was walking with Sammy the Bull Gravano and a few other bodyguards. And he said, "Mr. Gotti, would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" And Gotti said, "Fire away." And
Was it a planned interview?
yeah, well, no, it was sort of a politely asked, "I know, where you're eating. I know when you come out. Is it okay if I approach you? Otherwise, you never know what's going to happen."
Do you remember the interview?
No, to tell you the truth, I really don't. I just remember being shaking in my boots because of,
You were?
yeah,
Because it was him.
it was him. Yeah.
You know his wife was Jewish?
No, I didn't know.
You did not know that?
Nope.
Yeah, Gotti's wife was Jewish. Yeah, that was
Did you
I
ever
know-
interview famous musicians?
Yes.
Did you ever interview Dylan?
Oh, well, he wanted to
Bob
say,
Dylan?
No, not Dylan. Bruce Springsteen,
Mm-hmm.
Shaka Khan.
Oh, I love her.
Melissa Etheridge, Judy Collins.
Wow.
Gee, Peter, Paul, and Mary.
uh,
Joan Baez.
oh, yeah,
Joan
right.
Baez was one of the most fascinating people. Very intelligent.
Joan Baez.
Yep.
Yeah. Paul Yarrow just died.
Yeah,
I
2
think
3
Wednesday.
days ago.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Passed away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I sent Dave a shout out for that 500 mile the Hooters did with them. Yeah.
Right.
I think Stookie is the only living. Mary Travers died years ago.
Yes.
Yeah. But musicians are fun to interview. They have a lot of stories to tell.
Did you ever smoke a joint with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to leave it at
Yeah,
that.
only because you told
This
me
is
that.
a good Catholic school, and I
no,
don't want to entice.
No, that's okay. I saw a beer truck pulling out of here the other day.
Oh,
So, you're okay. I saw a Budweiser wagon coming out of here.
That's funny.
So, yeah, you did with Chaka Khan.
Shaka Khan. Yeah.
How did you become a professor?
By mistake. No.
You like teaching?
I
though.
actually love teaching. I was approaching my mid 50s and decided there's got to be a better way to earn a living than carrying 75 pounds of equipment.
You don't like doing that?
I did, but the time had come that I was starting to feel my age. And I looked around and saw what else I could do. And I was an adjunct at several schools, at Chestnut Hill, at Temple, at Arcadia. And then there was a full-time tenure track at Montco, and I applied, and lo and behold. So I taught for 13 years at Montco, and I loved it. I love teaching. I'm grateful I had the students that I had. They taught me probably more than I taught them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Has it changed over the years? Basic storytelling. I always feel like, you can read a book from the 1800s and it's got to have
Beginning,
the same
a middle,
beginning,
and
a
an
middle, the
end.
end, and a story arc.
No,
And
that's
does
the-
the
that-
character change?
That's
I
the
always,
framework.
I
Well,
always
you can tell
say.
a story by character. You can tell a story by environment. You can tell a story by dialogue. I mean, I'm trying to remember the movie. I can't remember the plot. Is the two homosexual cowboys?
Midnight Cowboy.
No, not Midnight. It was just
Yeah.
recently.
Oh, A Brokeback Mountain.
That's it.
Oh.
Funny, I know those things. Why
where
would I know
the
that?
scenery actually becomes
Yes.
character in that movie.
Right.
So I thought that was novel the way they did that. But
Well, Dances with Wolves was like that too. The scenery and
Well,
Was-
that's why
that's
we want to go to Sicily to
Oh,
tell the
sure.
Italian mob story,
Yeah.
because that's where much of it
well, you're
started.
not
and
going to. You
still
won't be shaking in your boots, will you?
Yes,
our-
I
our
will the
guests,
whole
you will.
time.
I think she'll
Hiding
be
be-
eating at every restaurant.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But the
that's
scenery
the place to
alone,
eat.
it'll be the story.
Were you in Desert Storm?
Yes.
Where were you working?
We
at?
were
I
well,
mean, were you with,
we were
like what?
setting up
Were you
satellite.
Fox?
No, I was with NBC.
NBC. Okay.
And we were setting up satellite equipment in Riyadh. And this is when,
This is the first Bush, right?
yes,
Okay. Bush Senior.
this is 1991, I believe. Is that Bush Senior? No, I can't remember now. Jeez. All I remember is they were supposed to be Scud missiles filled with gas, and fortunately they weren't.
They were not.
But no, they were not. The same. And then we went to Tel Aviv, and the same thing happened in Tel Aviv, setting up satellite equipment, and that was also very scary, because when you set up satellite equipment, you're basically sending a signal up into the atmosphere that can be
Yeah,
easily traced and
Right.
back down to
How long were you
home
gone?
base. 2 months.
Were you married at the time?
Oh, I'm still married.
Okay. So you're still married.
Yes. No, the problem, the reason why you asked me is there's a lot of travel involved in being a photojournalist. There are some, if people are interested, there are some great people to follow. Lindsay Dario. There's one who I always admired. She was with the Philadelphia Inquirer, April Saul, who now does basically stories about, she fell in love with Camden, New Jersey, and she left the Inquirer and just freelances a great deal, but admires Camden and tries to cover the story of Camden. And then if you're looking for the old tried and true, there's Henri Cartier-Bresson, Robert Capa, Eddie Adams. These are all names that you can Google, and you get a good foundation in photojournalism.
Well, was there any particular story you wanted to do, or do you just like Jill and I try to focus on things that are educational, informative, and entertaining? And some people just do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And what attracted you? What attracts you?
I like personality stories. I like people that are unusual, offbeat. I love pet stories.
Pet?
You know.
Jill has a really interesting dog you might want to
Yeah,
try
the
to do a
monkey
story
dog
about.
is that.
Mhm. Affenpinscher.
Oh boy.
But and it's the personalities that make the story. The problem is these days with YouTube and social media, a lot of people are not themselves on camera. They're a persona, a different person. They're being not what they truly are, but what they think the audience wants them to be. So you have to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff there.
But when you work for a news station, is it frustrating because you have to go on assignment and do the stories that they tell you to do. So
Yes, it is, but it also opens up your world. I was on both sides of the fence there. I was a photographer, I was an editor, I was an assignment editor, I was an operations producer. So I got to see a little of each part.
So if you were an assignment editor for John and I, what assignment would
Oh,
you send
boy.
us on right now?
Right now. Well, there's rehearsals going on here at Villanova. John and I noticed that there were women in young women in look like cheerleading outfits,
I don't know.
and it's a very cold day out today, and they're dressed in mini skirts and knee boots. And I said, that's an interesting story. So that's what I would send you out to cover. I'm sure it's a rehearsal for either dance squad or cheerleading squad.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the other. I don't know.
There was a long line.
There are some
of women.
interesting
I saw
faculty that are here. That are there was a priest that we interviewed who was a defense lawyer for 7 years in Delaware County, which is a suburb of Philadelphia. And by the way, we are interviewing Allan Schear, SCH.
He's a little early on this one, but go ahead.
Am I early?
Yeah.
Were you counting? All right, then I'm not going to do it. No, I'm not doing it.
Was it every 15 minutes?
Every 10 minutes.
It's every 10 minutes?
I believe it. Well, when I was...
See, I knew this would be a learning experience.
I'll have to look it up. It may have
forever
It
the
may
teacher.
save us from something. I don't know.
I mean, do you ever listen to All News Radio?
No.
You mean like KYW?
KYW.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I don't listen to it now that I don't work for SEPTA anymore.
I do.
Okay. Well, listen and just look at your watch every 10 minutes.
It's every 10 minutes.
I have to say that Allan was generous and brought us snacks today. We have an Oreo, a Velveeta Crunchy, and then
tell me when I'm supposed to do this because I see you looking up at the clock.
A fig bar.
So when you tell me
at 10:40, I believe is the next.
Okay, 10:40. I'll make the announcement.
You do it at the top of the hour.
You said you taught a class on ethics.
Yes, and
that's interesting.
Actually, that was part of the survey course, Intro to Mass Media and Society, and we discussed journalistic ethics and what is proper, what's improper.
So,
and a lot of people have gotten caught in impropriety over the years that have cost them jobs, and and John and I often have this argument. He wants to put something in. Allan says, "Don't put that in," and then
I get text messages in the middle of the night.
Well, there was, and I'll tell you what Jill's referring to. One of the things that when we did the Martirano film, which I thought was really worthy of Netflix and still do.
You may want to explain to the audience that doesn't know about George Martirano.
Okay, George Martirano.
Life Without Parole, the story of George Martirano, which is available now on Roku, streaming on Roku, video on demand, Vimeo.
It's about a man
Vimeo on demand.
Who served how many years?
And wait, I may tell you the last one. Amazon Prime. He got life without parole, which meant he was supposed to die in prison for mostly marijuana charges. He claims it was a setup, which is the hardest thing to beat. A frame, he calls it. And we did the story of him.
And now your ethics question was?
My question was, or is, that one of the stories he told us is that his family had several strip bars in Baltimore. There was a section of Baltimore where there was strip bars.
Jill, you're from Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And there was the district attorney would collect money every Friday from them. And where did the money go? To Spiro Agnew. And George, now we have this recorded, George telling us the story. Mm-hmm. I wanted it in the film. Jill didn't want to put it in the film. Fortunately, her daughter, Jennifer, thank you, Jennifer, supported me in saying that it could have been in there. What's your thoughts on that?
I would have gone for a second source. Otherwise, it's just opinion. You could say anything about anybody, right?
Yeah.
And that's how rumors get started. And these days, that's how we tend to normalize a lot of misinformation, disinformation. So if he's saying Agnew lost his vice presidency because of...
Well, ultimately he did, I think.
Yeah, shady dealings.
That kind of stuff.
I would seek It may take you longer. You may have to delay the story, but I would seek a second, maybe even a third source.
Yeah, someone once said, if your mother tells you she loves you,
Check
get
it out.
Check
Yeah,
it out.
check
Get
it
another
out.
opinion.
Yep.
My,
And
my mother.
the other line is, if there's a dog in the story, get the name of the dog.
Oh, that's a good one too. All right, it's 10:40.
You missed it. It's 10:42. Go ahead.
Okay. We are listening to WXVU.org, streaming worldwide, and 89.1 The Roar. Our guest today is Allan Schear. He is a photojournalist, a Renaissance man, if you will.
I have to give John a plug because we're really not educated on being radio hosts, but you have doesn't John have a natural radio voice?
Definitely, without a doubt.
Like, you're born with that. That's just a gift you have. So I have to
wasted my whole
say
life.
that
You could have been a good voiceover artist. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
And
And you're not bad looking either, so maybe you could have been.
You mean I could have?
You could
I
have
could have
played a
had
good
that house on the
gangster. He
Hamptons.
definitely has the gangster look.
That's true.
I
Remember
do.
that the one
Now I'm
interview
taking pictures, by the way.
I'm okay with that.
during this, and maybe you could even post them in
Oh,
a future story to show the audience what you look like.
well, they better look. You might have to do some editing with my picture. Wait, but remember the somebody was very
It was
complimentary.
it was in Cape May. Is that the one?
No,
you
the
thought?
one at the synagogue. We interviewed a Holocaust
He
survivor.
passed away, didn't he? A Holocaust survivor.
He was this little guy, and I think John reminded him of the priest that actually saved him in Italy, and he was just over the top in love with John. He just could not stop complimenting him, and I do think that's possibly why.
The Jill and I had the very good fortune, because there's so many of them passing away, to interview several Holocaust survivors.
Yeah.
And one actually was inked, tattooed on his right
Having
arm.
his number
143641
Now,
is his number.
unfortunately, we interviewed a woman, and
Magda
Bresnitz.
Yeah.
And her grandson had flown in from California, and I was just with his mother, and he was unfortunately one of the people who lost his home to the fire. So our hearts go out to him and everybody that suffered, and anybody that knows anybody. It's kind of like six degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Yep.
We all know somebody, and Allan's daughter also suffered.
Your daughter lost her property in
Yep.
in Cala.
And if you're interested in journalism, my advice is continue watching and looking at the Los Angeles Times is doing a phenomenal job of covering. This is basically a hellhole now.
It looks like a war zone.
Yeah.
It's
So,
a shame.
It's absolutely amazing at some of the coverage that they're providing. And just think, these are journalists that probably haven't slept in 24, 48 hours. And one of the hardest stories to cover is a wildfire because of the soot, the ash, the smoke, and, the constant, especially in California, climbing up the hills to get the shot.
Do you remember the Olympics in Munich? Did you see
remember
Did you see the movie?
No, I haven't.
You should.
1972.
Yes, you would definitely find that most intriguing.
Yeah.
I thought it was one of the best war movies or non-war movies I've ever seen.
I did cover the 96 Olympics in Atlanta with the bombing.
There's a priest that was working for counterintelligence. That it's a priest here at Villanova, and he was then in counterintelligence. And I think, and maybe I need to get a second opinion on this, as you say, that he became disillusioned and became a priest because he knew the guy was framed. And so if I'm wrong, I'll be admonished. But you did cover that.
I covered.
Did you see the movie?
No.
Okay. It was a shame what happened to that poor guy.
But he was, I think, eventually exonerated.
Yeah. But I think he died there after almost some time. Sure. What was the scariest moment you ever had as a photojournalist?
Oh, there are several. um, I can't even remember the story, but I was leaning out of the helicopter with my feet on the skids and camera on my shoulder, actually. And I think it may have been a wildfire. And we were
In California?
I
Or-
don't think it was California. I think it was actually Montana or somewhere up in the Dakotas. And I, just remember for half an hour we're circling and circling and circling, and I'm leaning, pretty far out. And we land, and I look around, and my safety belt had become undone.
Oh my God.
And I was
I was going to ask you if you didn't you have
oh
a
yeah,
safety
you always
belt
have a harness, and
Yeah,
and
sure.
I was dumb enough not to double and triple check it. And sure enough, when I looked down, I practically fainted because I thought for sure I was harnessed, to the craft at least. So that was one of the scariest moments. Another was, I don't know if you'll remember, does the name Richard Queen ring a bell? He was one of the first hostages released from Iran because he had MS, and it was a humanitarian gesture. And I remember I was actually freelancing for CNN overseas when this happened. And we followed him from Iran to Switzerland to Wiesbaden to Germany. And that was, being in Iran during the hostage situation, you never knew who was your friend or who wasn't. And so that was a scary moment. And of course, there are, I had one where I was doing a speedboat story, and I was cradling the camera, and the speedboat driver was taking this turn at a good 60, 80 miles an hour. And the force of that turn was pulling the camera out from underneath my arm. And I said to myself, if you lose the camera, you lose the job. And I finally elbowed the driver real hard. And he finally got, the picture that the forces were taking the camera out of my hand.
Do you think you had a natural feel for interviewing people, or is it something you honed along the way?
It's something I honed. My wife constantly reminds me that I need to shut up and listen more often. That I tend, as a New Yorker, to interject my thoughts, my opinions before somebody has a chance to finish the sentence. So I'm always cognizant of that.
When are you going to start doing that?
I think it's something that you learn. There are very few natural interviewers. You try and connect on a certain, emotional level, but it takes time.
Did you ever listen to Marty Moscowane?
Sure, all the time.
I always wanted to. She was probably one of my favorites because she's not classically trained. She's like us. She's
and for people that are outside of the Philadelphia
that's
audience,
right again. Thank you. This is where you come. This is why we had you here.
She is a local WHYY show interviewer, very astute, very well regarded.
And when you say astute, well read.
Yes,
that's part of being.
Well, that's part of being.
Being astute. Yeah.
Have you ever been on an interview? Because this happened to me once, where I was just so enthralled by the person I was talking to. It was actually Marissa Tomei. And I just remember her in all those movies, My Cousin Vinny. And I was just so thinking I was actually talking to the character versus the person that I think I gave her a little scare.
Was this in Sundance?
This was at Sundance. And I was just, Marissa.
Is she short? She's short.
She is, she's not tall. She's not tall.
So when
did that ever happen to you?
Were you ever intimidated by anybody you interviewed?
All the time.
Who?
Sure.
Who intimidated you?
John Gotti.
No, he wouldn't.
Well, again, I was very nervous because of the situation and the bodyguards.
With the camera, I would be scared.
No one's ever intimidated me.
There were some football coaches that were very Lou Holtz from Notre Dame.
Okay. Won a national championship there.
Bill Parcells. So
Yeah, NFL Super Bowl champ.
These people who tend to be.
What was Parcells like?
Very demanding.
Oh, really? When you
Yeah.
interviewed him,
Yeah.
Well, he was Bill Parcells.
Yes.
Yeah, like if you would have interviewed Lombardi, he would have been Lombardi.
You can say all you want and ask, for, treat me as, an equal. That doesn't always come to pass. Sometimes they just are who they are, and they're going to browbeat you no matter what. So
yeah.
John, who was the most interesting person you ever interviewed?
I haven't met them yet.
There we go.
I haven't met them yet.
Nobody intimidated you.
But no, I've never been intimidated.
What interview were you most excited about doing?
Hands down. Our Holocaust survivor who passed away. Hands down. That's
David
like
Koch.
That's like talking to history. I'll never forget anything. I mean, I had him in my house. That when you see somebody whose arms tattooed, your mind goes all over. What happened every day? How did you get through the day? How did you survive? Martirano surviving in prison in solitary for 5 years. I couldn't have done. I spent a weekend in jail in Ocean City. I couldn't. Are you kidding?
You just reminded me, one of the stories I covered in, again, this is a long time ago, 1980, was Solidarity movement in Poland. I was in Poland for about 2 months and traveled all over from Gdansk in the north down to, I believe it's pronounced Katowice, which is their industrial steelmaking south. And on one day off, I went to Auschwitz to actually take a tour. This was in the middle of winter, so there were very few.
So you really got a real feel for it.
Yeah. So
and it's cold there,
and it's something that's stuck with me.
Yeah. So you'll never forget it.
And we interviewed Lech Walesa. So there's another politician.
Did you really?
Yeah, but at the time he was the union trade boss and holding the country together. The Russians were poised to come over the border and take control, and he rose above the situation.
You mentioned A Real Pain, which is a movie that's out in theaters now, and that's
is it time out? You're looking at the clock.
Two cousins travel to Auschwitz.
Mm-hmm. Is that the name of them? Is it a play?
It's a movie.
It's a movie called A Real Pain.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to say anything about that? Did that remind you of how your experience?
Yeah. It's more of a comedy drama, but it has some hysterical bits in it, but very emotional, touching. It's about two distant cousins, haven't seen each other in ages, and they take a trip to Poland to honor their grandmother who basically has died, and they wanted to relive all her trials and tribulations. So yes.
I went to a work camp in Germany, and just being in that space, and it was very, very moving.
Yeah, we also went to the White's Museum. What is it, White's?
Oh, yes.
And there was a documentary we saw, Weitzman, I'm sorry. And we went to see a documentary that was made about a Holocaust survivor. And he actually had a relationship with a woman while he was in there. And what was really incredible was he was liberated by the American Army, and they actually gave him a uniform, and they made him a sergeant and gave him a gun, and he actually shot and killed a couple SS people. And then
he got, because he could speak both languages.
Yeah.
They needed
an
interpreter.
Yeah. So,
and then he lost track of the woman that he had met. Their goal was to meet after the war, if there was an ending, at a specific spot. And she went there and waited and waited and waited. And he was busy in the army. He never came back. But years later, even after he got married, they reunited. It was a true story. And his grandson documented this whole reunion with this woman. And on her deathbed, she requested to see him. She refused to see him for all the years, but on her deathbed, she wanted to see
Acquiesced.
him,
Mhm.
and it was really quite a story.
Well, when the Army came back,
Wait, and it was
sorry.
funded by Hillary Clinton.
yes, she funded the movie.
Is it available for streaming? Or
Yes,
it's on
and
YouTube?
it's free and available on
What's
YouTube.
the name of it?
I'll try to figure it out.
We'll figure it
while
out.
we're
But
talking.
when the Army came back, they gave him a serial number so he could get on the ship with them to come back.
Oh,
That's a
geez.
great story.
It is.
All right, I want to do this, and then we'll talk about next week's guest, and then we'll say goodbye because I know you guys have other things, right?
But I've enjoyed this immensely.
Thank you. You're listening to WXVU.org. We stream worldwide. We're also on YouTube. And locally, we're 89.1. And our guest today was Allan Schear, photojournalist, Renaissance man. I never brought up a thing about watches or cameras or anything.
Don't get into the hobby. It's too
no.
expensive.
I'm not going to get into watches.
I don't like the competition.
No. There's yeah. Anyway, our guest next week is retired Villanova lawyer, educator, Jack Dobbin. He's also an author. So he'll be our guest here next week. We'll be back at 10 o'clock with Jill Frechie. This is John Ricciutti. Until next time. And Allan Schear. Have a good day.
I do have the name of the movie, and
Okay,
when
go
I
ahead.
say it,
'Cause
you're going to
we
remember
do have a minute or two.
how Saba kept singing. And remember, it started out because the Holocaust survivor's son was a cantor in a synagogue, and he serenaded
Bucks
us
County.
before and after the movie, and that in itself was so moving.
Yeah.
And he was the one that helped produce the story, who followed his. And when you watch the documentary, again, it's free on YouTube, you'll notice that he uses a lot of what you did with your documentaries, and that he did extreme close-ups to the face and the hands, and it really invoked this gut-wrenching emotion.
That's what they're designed for.
Yes, and it's so true. And it was very moving. Yes, next week.
Yeah, it's Jack Dobbin. He's an author.
Thank you.
He became disillusioned with the law, and he in Boston, and he saw, I guess, an advertisement and probably the legal intelligencer, my guess, and he applied for a job as a Villanova law professor, and became that. And he never practiced law again. Gave up everything that there is to.
Sounds like a
you have a family member as a lawyer.
Yeah, a recovering lawyer. Sounds like a lot of lawyers I know that
recovering lawyers.
Yeah, 30% of them leave the profession within, I think, the first 5 years.
Really?
Yeah, I have to double check that statistic, but I think.
Yeah, you don't want to be misquoted. No. I want to come away from this having learned something today. Thank you and have a good day. Till next time. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for your input.
Thank you, John. Thank you,
both.
Allan.
Okay.